From a Gen X point of view is brought to you today by the number one. One being the very first bonus episode that we have of the Gen X POV podcast. And one because I am the only one here. This is me, Mr. Jason Roskam. Dave is not here with me. He's out at the beach, gallivanting around the shores of New Jersey. And we're also talking about the very first Nintendo video game console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, continuing the discussion and kind of going into some other details of that. So this is sort of a episode 2, part 2, if you will. And I've called it the price of nostalgia because, you know, thinking about getting back into retro gaming, things like that, specifically with the NES, and how much would it cost to get back into something like that? So we're going to get into all of that here. And big hello in the chat to Big Lovin' and Lunar Girl, some of our biggest followers of the Gen X POV podcast. Big Lovin' also from the Escape Pod, one of the funniest podcasts out there. So, and they're already talking shit in the chat. So welcome, everyone. Now, I want to continue by talking about some more favorite games of the NES. When Dave and I did episode 2, we talked about some of our favorite games, but I had a whole shitload of honorable mentions in here that we were kind of running out of time by the end of that episode. I think we were already well over 2 hours, and I was trying to pull it back. So I'm like, fuck it. We won't get into the honorable mentions or anything. And yes, they're mentioning in the chat my freshly shaven head. Like, this was literally 45 minutes ago that I did this. Had a very long day, a lot of yard work these last 2 days, a lot of time in the sun. You couldn't tell due to my glowing white head, but yeah, I was out in the sun a lot over the last 2 days, and I just finally took a shower about an hour ago, shaved my head also. Tomorrow, the body hair is coming off, so that'll be something. Oh, we've also got Don in the chat, and Scott of Used and Abused, and its relaunch on September 11th. Never forget. So, talking about some honorable mentions. And by the way, guys, in the chat, if you have any of your old favorite NES games that you want to talk about, bring it up, and I will definitely talk about it. And welcome, David Schmuck, old friend of mine. Good to see him in here. So some honorable mentions. I mean, you can't talk about the NES games and not talk about the Super Mario Brothers series. I know Dave, I think the original Super Mario Brothers was in his top 5. And let's be honest, it's one of the best, if not the best game on the original NES. So many things that it did. The groundbreaking Super Mario Brothers literally saved video games in the 1980s after the video game crash in the early 80s with Atari and the arcades and everything. Super Mario Brothers came around and changed everything, because when the NES first came out, we talked about this a little bit in episode 2, it didn't come with Super Mario Brothers initially. It came with that fucking Robbie the Robot and Gyromite, and it was like, okay, this is kind of neat, very different. But it wasn't until Super Mario Brothers hit and it started getting bundled with the console that things really took off. So, this is the first time I've had any alcohol since we recorded our last episode. Oh, it's so good once it hits your lips. A little bit more Oktoberfest today. So yeah, and the whole Mario series, the first Super Mario Brothers, oh my God, we could do like 3 episodes just on that game alone. But then you went in a whole different direction with Mario 2. I mean, the fact that they killed the Japanese version of Mario 2 in the US, where they never released it because it was basically more of the same. It was more Super Mario Brothers, same game engine and everything else, just fucking harder. And they're like, these fucking dumb Westerners, they're never going to get this. So let's do something else. So they had this other Japanese game called Doki Doki Panic, which was this platformer, but you picked up shit and you threw it at your enemies. And that's how you killed your enemies. You didn't jump on them and squash them. Huge departure. And it's a very controversial game. I know a lot of video game purists actually really like it. I don't dislike it, but it was not my favorite game by far. Probably my least favorite in the entire Super Mario series, but you know, it is part of that Mario history, and it's a very unique point in the history of Mario. And then, of course, Mario 3, which the quality in that was through the fucking roof. They turned everything up to 11. Really, really good game. And it introduced us to a lot of the concepts that would travel over into Super Mario World that we saw later. So, yeah, Mario 3, that's, again, one of the greatest games ever made for the NES. And at a time, it was one of my favorite games on the NES. But as I look back on it now, there were other games, you know, my top 5, which to reiterate, Final Fantasy, Tecmo Super Bowl, Dragon Warrior, Legend of Zelda, Tetris. Other games that just had more meaning to me when I look back on things. But yeah, I played the shit out of Mario 3. Mario 1 and 2, for that matter. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. I know I have the first Zelda in my top 5. Zelda 2, for the longest time, I would say was my favorite NES game ever. It was, again, huge departure. Same thing they did with the Super Mario Brothers series. Very big departure from the style of the first one. But I tell you what, if you go back and even just re-listen to the soundtrack of Zelda 2, so good. And that's something else that we could spend probably a couple episodes on, and that's the music of some of these 8-bit games. Very, very low quality equipment that they were working on and everything, because they had to shove these audio files into these super small, like fucking like megabytes, like 10 megabyte fucking files on these things. So they couldn't spare a lot for the music. So the workaround was these 8-bit there's a fucking name for this style of music. But some of these musicians pulled it off so well, and Zelda 2 was one of those games that I think the music for that was fucking phenomenal. Another game that we're kind of getting out of my honorable mentions here, but another game that actually had surprisingly really good music on the NES, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Go back and listen to a lot of those tracks on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and especially if you played that game back in the day. Really, really good soundtrack. Like, very underrated. The game, oh my God, that fucking game. It was one of those games I played all the way through, got to the fucking end. The end boss was so fucking hard. I think I spent an hour fighting him and I couldn't do it. I'm like, fuck it, I'm done. Like, and I was a completionist. When I would play a fucking game on the NES, I would play it until I fucking finished. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I think, is one of the only games that I just straight up abandoned. I'm like, fuck it, I can't do it. I'm done. So if that tells you anything about that last boss fight. Somebody mentioned in the chat, Contra. Lunar Girl mentioned Contra. I'm pretty sure Dave said that was one of his top 5 favorites. I was looking for his list earlier and I couldn't find it, but I'm pretty sure he did. But yeah, Contra was a great game. The good thing about Contra 2 was the co-op in it. I remember spending a weekend with my cousin Jeff, and one of us had Contra. I can't remember who, but we took it to his house and we played the fucking shit out of that game. Beat the fuck out of it. I remember we beat it without the infinite lives code too. This was, I think we knew of the infinite lives at that point, but it was part of the challenge. You know, you had 2 guys and you were both going along. The weird thing about the co-op in Contra though was, you know, you were limited. You were both on the same fucking screen. There was no split screen or anything like that. Though there were split screen games back on the NES. More on that later. But yeah, so whoever was ahead, the screen would follow. But if the other guy was all the way at the other side of the screen, neither of you could move until like the guy on the left side of the screen started fucking moving with the other guy. But the great thing about Contra was the weapons. You know, you had the spreader, you had the machine gun, you had the laser. One other one that I can't remember, but you know, you'd get these different power-ups throughout the game and it would give you that weapon. And then when you're doing co-op, you really have to strategize, because I remember everybody wanted the spreader. That was like the most popular one. I was big on the laser because it did so much fucking damage, but you had to be really good at it. Like, you had to be good with the laser, because if you were a shitty shot, then it was fucking worthless. The spreader was for people who just fucking, they're just, YOLO, just fucking jam the fucking button. You're bound to hit something. The machine gun was pretty good. I went through a phase where I really liked the machine gun in Contra, but yeah, I can't remember what the other weapons were. But yeah, Contra was so fun, so much fun. And then of course you had the up, down, left, right, BA start. That's an iconic cheat code. I'm sure most of you guys have seen Wreck-It Ralph. All of the video game references in that, and then the Konami code, I think, was when King Candy was going into like the code of fucking of Sugar Rush. I wanted to say Candy Crush, but it was Sugar Rush. By the way, Wreck-It Ralph, phenomenal fucking movie. Absolutely love that movie, but more on that later. I think there was an NES controller there, and it was the Contra code is what got him into the fucking programming of Sugar Rush, so he could like fuck with Vanellope stuff. I've seen that movie a lot. So anyway, some more honorable mentions. Metroid, the first Metroid, really, really fun game. See, the problem with that though was, this was another good story with my mother. I talked about how I gave her like $60 one day to go buy me Dragon Warrior, and she's like, $60? One game is $60? And later on down the line, I knew I'd heard of Metroid for a long time. It was a classic NES game from early in the system's life, but I hadn't had a chance to play it because, again, the only games you get to play are like ones you get for fucking Christmas or your birthday, and then maybe if you save up a bunch of money throughout the year for, I don't know, allowances or something. But you don't get new games very often as a kid in the fucking 80s. So I eventually got Metroid, though. Another $50 game. Asked my mom to go buy it for me. She brought it back. Or I think I might have actually gone with her at the time. Either way. Came back, played it, beat it over the course of like 24 hours. And I'm like, well, fuck. So I actually was thinking, shit, I wonder if I can return this and maybe just, get my money back and buy another game. And my mom's like, no, you're not fucking returning that. So I was stuck with it, but then I ended up playing through it many more times, unlocked the fucking Samus outside of the suit ending when like she's, if you beat it in under a certain amount of time, the ending shows a cutscene of her without the suit on. And for most people not in the know, which I was not, you had no idea it was a woman under that costume. And it was like a huge shock. You're like, oh, fuck. And I discovered after multiple playthroughs, because when you see it and the fucking Metroid suit disappears, she's in like this her like blue bodysuit, right? If you beat it in under another time period, yes, Justin Bailey and dash 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 underneath. Yeah. He knows what's up. So anyway, if you beat it in under another certain amount of time, she appears instead of the blue jumpsuit, it's a blue fucking bikini because the midriff disappears. So yeah, I ended up playing through it multiple times, discovering a whole bunch more stuff, the secret endings. Thankfully, my mom said, go fuck yourself when I asked her if I could return it and go buy another game after I'd beaten it in under 24 hours. But another game that's stood the test of time. It's obviously multiple sequels. And then, holy fuck, when they started going into 3D on the GameCube, I want to say. GameCube? Anyway, the game is still around. Mike Tyson's motherfucking Punch-Out. I'm not talking about Punch-Out with Mr. Dream. I'm talking about the real Punch-Out. Mike Tyson's fucking Punch-Out. Holy shit, I played the fuck out of that game. And there was a period of time where I'm like, it's not possible to beat Mike Tyson. Like, everybody knew the code 007-373-5493 to actually jump straight forward to Mike Tyson. But the fight is so crazy. And that's the thing about the Punch-Out games is it's a lot of memorization of the yeah, we are missing something. I mentioned that at the top. But yeah, it's a lot of these games are about pattern memorization and memorizing how the fighters fight, and certain time marks they do certain moves. And that's the same with the Mike Tyson fight. It's very structured, and once you learn that structure, you can beat him, but it's still fucking hard because the first minute and a half of the first round, all he is doing is throwing fucking uppercuts. And if he lands a single one, it's an immediate knockdown. And you're only allowed 3 knockdowns in a round, and or 2 really, because the third is a TKO. And something else I've noticed during the Mike Tyson fight, if you get knocked down 4 times total throughout the fight, throughout all 3 rounds, you're fucking done. So you can really only get knocked down 3 times throughout the whole fucking fight to make it to the end. So beating Mike Tyson was one of my, in my opinion, one of my greatest accomplishments on the NES. Because at the time, when you first fight him, you're like, holy fuck, there's no way to beat this guy. No fucking way. And eventually like, okay, well, maybe if I dodge his uppercuts and I just dodge for a minute and a half. Holy shit, I made it to the second phase of the first fucking round. I might actually survive. And it's not that easy afterwards, especially when you get into round 3 and he's just throwing all kinds of random shit at you. But yeah, it is possible to beat Mike Tyson in that game. And that is, again, one of my all-time favorite games. Tetris was in my top 5, but another fantastic puzzle game was Dr. Mario. And I can't remember if I told the story on the show. I think I had to skip over it. But when I first met my wife, she actually had an NES, or her family did. And I remember seeing Dr. Mario there. Oh, I love Dr. Mario. She's like, oh, do you want to play? I'm like, sure. And I don't remember how long into us dating this happened, but we played a versus game in Dr. Mario. That was the first split screen anything I'd ever seen in a Nintendo game. And we did like the split screen competitive. Beat the piss out of me. I'm like, whoa, that was weird, because I am no slouch at Dr. Mario. I'm actually pretty fucking good, if I do say so myself. She is on another fucking plane of existence when it comes to Dr. Mario. I guess that's all her and her siblings and her dad did for a very long time. And she's fucking good. Here's the thing. Every version of Dr. Mario that's come out over the years, it was ported to the N64. I think it was ported to the SNES too. N64 for sure, because I still have that version. There was a version for the Wii. There was a version on the Wii U, Dr. Luigi. I think there was a mobile version that came out recently. Anyway, it was also included on the NES Classic, which we've played again recently because I have that NES Classic. She destroys me every fucking time. I finally got to a point where I'm like, I can't. You're too good. Like, I cannot. No matter how many times we play, I'll never fucking beat you. She's like, all right, well, how about one day when I have a few glasses of wine? I'm like, okay, I'll think about it. So last week, she has like fucking 3 glasses. She shotguns like 3 glasses of wine. She's getting fucking up there already in the stratosphere. And she's like, you want to play Dr. Mario now? I'm like, yes, I do. And she beats the fucking shit out of me again. She destroys me. I'm like, fuck it. I can't. She's too good at Dr. Mario. Although there is a version of Dr. Mario, the N64 version, that actually has 4-player versus mode. I would love to get me and Kristen and 2 other people in that fucking versus mode just to see how crazy that would get. I think I have 4 N64 controllers. I still have my old N64 too, by the way. And I'm pretty sure I have 4 controllers, but that's a conversation for another day. Getting on to some of my other honorable mentions from the NES. Contra's in here. Mega Man 2. And really Mega Man 2 and 3. The first Mega Man, I never played. I don't think I played that until I got it on an emulator in the late 90s. But I'd heard about the series Mega Man. And then when Mega Man 2 came out, it's, again, you get all your information from fucking Nintendo Power back in the day. So I had my Nintendo Power subscription, and they're talking Mega Man 2 through the fucking roof, right? So I'm okay, I have to get this, save up some money. And I eventually got Mega Man 2, and holy shit, what a fantastic fucking game. What a game. And again, you can spend a whole episode on that, let alone the other sequels, but just another fantastic game that, you know, rightly deserves to be in any top list for the NES, but I only had 5 spaces in my top list. So this was another one. I mentioned Dragon Warrior as one of my top 5 games. Dragon Warrior 2 and 3, also phenomenal games for the NES, because I'm a big RPG guy. Love role-playing games, and Dragon Warrior 2 and 3 really just improved the formula of 1. And really, they were chasing Final Fantasy at this point too, which Final Fantasy was. But Dragon Warrior 2 and 3 were no slouches by any stretch. And there was a Dragon Warrior 4, but it fucking sucked because you could only control one character, and the other ones were all on like fucking autoplay, and fuck that. But we are going to talk about something else when it comes to Dragon Warriors 2, 3, and 4. RC Pro-Am. Another great fucking game on the NES. Now, this is the controls for this. Like, imagine the controls for the original Resident Evil, but on a racing game. But RC Pro-Am was so fun. I played the shit out of that fucking game. I think somebody gave it to me when I was a kid. Somebody's like, I don't really like this game. You want it? Sure. And fucking hell, I loved this game. To this day, whenever I fire up an emulator or something, that's one of the first games I go to and just do the first several races. So yeah. Big Lovin' in the chat mentioned Blades of Steel. Love Blades of Steel. And of course, the best part of that game, Blades of Steel being a hockey game, by the way, was the fights. You know, if you like butt up against somebody enough times, you guys actually you go to a different game mode to where it's like you're two dudes and you're just fucking punching each other. And whoever lost the fight was the one that got put in the fucking penalty box, which is hilarious. But yeah, Blades of Steel. Sports games were not huge yet, but games like Blades of Steel and, like I said, Tecmo Super Bowl were really starting to show that you could do sports games right in consoles. Oh, there are so many bad sports games out there, not just for the NES, but all over. Did anybody out there ever play the Joe Montana Sports Talk Football on the Genesis? NFL Sports Talk Football. Holy shit. Talk about an awful fucking football game. It was great because they touted this whole the live commentary, which you didn't really see in sports games up to this point. It was like this robotic commentator, and he was commentating on the different things that were going on in the game, and that part was revolutionary. But the fucking game itself, god awful. It was terrible. But I played a lot of it because my buddy had a Genesis and he had the fucking game. Another honorable mentions for NES games, Battletoads. I know this has gone down as one of the most difficult games, at least of this era. I really loved it. I thought it was fun. It was a lot of fun, this game. So Battletoads is really up there, but that's sort of the I mean, I guess it's piggybacking off of the Double Dragon, which, by the way, there was the Double Dragon and Battletoads combination game. But yeah, these kind of like brawler fighter games where now you've got your Streets of Rage, and what was the one for the Super Nintendo? Not Streets of Rage, that was a Sega game, but there was one for the Super Nintendo where you could be the big bulky dude, you could be the chick, or you could just be like the average looking dude. Fucking hell, what was the name of that game? Oh well, it'll come to me eventually, probably after I'm done streaming. A real underrated series, Final Fight. Thanks, Angelo. You're the best, man. I miss you, by the way. Shadowgate and Deja Vu. I know Shadowgate, I think they actually both were PC ports at the time. But again, this is the late 80s, early 90s. So this is one of your only real experiences with these sort of point and click adventure games. And I thought they were both really fun on the NES, especially Deja Vu, because it was a totally different setting. Shadowgate was more of a medieval fantasy style setting, where Deja Vu was you were like a detective, like an old 1940s detective, like a Dick Tracy kind of guy. But it was a very serious game. Really, really good. I thought it was fucking awesome. Really loved both of those games. There was a third game in that series called Uninvited. Never played it. Always wanted to, but by the time that came out, the Super Nintendo was starting to come out, and my interest in NES games was starting to fade. And then I think we both mentioned this at one point during the episode 2, but the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then there was the arcade game. Two different games. The first, just the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, fucking hard as shit. I eventually beat it, and I think we did talk about this in episode 2, because you had the different weapons. Like Donatello had the fucking staff that went halfway across the fucking screen. Raphael had his little size, and they had like the shortest range. But yeah, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, also a good one. So moving on from that, I wanted to talk about, pulling up my notes because my iPad turned itself off. So NES ports, what the hell did I mean when I wrote that? I don't know. Riveting, I know. Yeah, I wrote NES ports, and I don't really know what that means. I mean, I guess if you look at systems like the DS, the 3DS, the Wii U, they all have the virtual consoles. And I think that's what I was trying to get to when I started these notes, but I put them together real quick. How there are a lot of ports of the original NES games that have shown up on later Nintendo consoles that you can play in their original form. I know some games, until like this NES Classic came out, you couldn't get in their original forms. Final Fantasy being one of the biggest examples, because the original Final Fantasy got remade pretty early. There was a version, I think it was called Final Fantasy Origins, for the original PlayStation. And then there were other ports of that version, and it was really hard to find the original NES version of Final Fantasy. But Yeah, it was really hard to find that. So real quick, Angelo, guy who's done many podcasts over the years, I learned of him. Goddamn, this must have been 7, 8 years ago. When he was doing a Magic the Gathering podcast, his top 5 NES games are Zelda, and then Mega Man 2, Baseball Stars. Holy shit, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, another good early sports game. DuckTales, of course. DuckTales was very popular back then. And Kid Icarus, which I almost say is like a precursor to Metroid. It actually had the same password system. And yeah, Kid Icarus was another classic NES game, which I think they tried to make a sequel to once, maybe in the N64 or GameCube era, but it was another early Nintendo created game that I'm sure they wanted to build a franchise around, but it was never it never really panned out. But anyway, good list though. I don't disagree with any of those. Something interesting that's happened with retro games over the last, I don't know, this has been going on for a while now, but are speed runs. Something that I've actually been very interested in lately, and that's how a lot of people take these old games and they just try to beat them as fast as humanly possible. And I really got interested in this when I saw, this was a few years ago now, and I'm sure that record's since been broken, but where somebody was playing the original Super Mario Brothers, and basically they did the entire time, they never stopped. It was always holding down the run button and pushing forward and just timing their jumps at the exact right time. And I'll give you an example here. I'm looking at speedrun.com. This is apparently an official source for tracking leaderboards for speedruns. First place at the moment is 4 minutes, 55 seconds, and 646 milliseconds. This was broken 7 months ago by a guy named Cosmic in the US. And I say the milliseconds because the previous record was 4 minutes, 55 seconds, and 746 milliseconds. So that is how crazy these fucking speedruns are getting, to where they're so refined now, to where they really have to do it within the millisecond. And most of these are on the original platform. There are some, if they were done on an emulator, it's annotated on here. So number 4 was done on an emulator, as was number 8. But the others are people getting copies of the actual cartridge and console and doing these fucking speed runs. Some other interesting ones that I found were the original Legend of Zelda. The current speed record for that is 28 minutes and 8 seconds. The previous is 28 minutes and 9 seconds. And this 28 minutes, 8 seconds was actually broken 1 week ago. And the number 2 was done 1 month ago. And then number 3, 28 minutes and 15 seconds was 7 months ago. So you constantly got these gamers who are trying to like shave literal milliseconds off of these speedrun times. And I think it's fucking awesome. And there's tons of videos on YouTube, by the way, of people doing this. Final Fantasy, my favorite game, they have different categories for this one because there's any percentage, and then there's any percentage, no RNG manipulation, which I guess there's some way to manipulate the RNG, probably with the random battles in between, you know, the fucking towns and dungeons and everything, because you can hit a lot of random fucking battles, even when you're in dungeons. But, you know, sometimes you can get lucky, but sometimes you can just get fucking hosed. And I guess maybe there's a way to manipulate that. But yeah, with no RNG manipulation, the fastest speed run for the first Final Fantasy is 2 hours and 54 minutes and 3 seconds. Now, this was done on an emulator, though. So the fastest on an actual console is 2 hours, 55 minutes, 43 seconds. That was set 2 years ago. So I don't know if there's not a lot of people playing Final Fantasy and trying to do a speed run. I mean, 3 hours is a long time to commit to trying to do a speed run. But at the same time, fuck, you would think that there's still got to be some wiggle room in there, some room to shave off a few seconds. Now, the first Dragon Warrior. This one gets even crazier because with no RNG manipulation, the fastest run is 5 hours, 15 minutes, and 7 seconds. And that was set 4 years ago. So, whew, man, you got to wonder if that's like the absolute best. Now, the next best before that was 5 hours and 25 minutes. So this guy 4 years ago shaved off 10 seconds from the next best run. So that's just how crazy these fucking speed runs get. And it's gotten me And yes, speed runs are quick, and it's really gotten me thinking about, like, god damn, man, like, are there any games out there that haven't been just speed run to death? Like, is there really, it's got me wondering, are there any games out there that I actually have a chance to, commit some time to and actually try to do a speed run? Maybe, I don't know. So some games that I would love to try, though, are the original Final Fantasy, of course, because that is my absolute favorite game for the NES. Dragon Warrior, and then just maybe try to find some obscure game. Now, the title of this is titled The Price of Nostalgia, because I wanted to get into a little bit of, how much would this be? And, as Dave and I have been doing this podcast about Generation X, a lot of articles that you read, they talk about how Generation X is really into nostalgia. And I mean, that's true to an extent. I mean, we grew up with all of this technology, and we have the means at our fingertips to kind of re-access that whenever we want. I mean, I guess boomers technically could be nostalgic. It's like, hey, remember when we used to go into the backyard and play with sticks and rocks? I guess you could be nostalgic with that. I guess even millennials could be nostalgic. It's like, hey, remember back when everybody used to just give us everything that we wanted, and there was no accountability for our actions, and people would tell us that we'd make millions with our lesbian dance theory degree by the time we were 22. Remember those days? Oh, good days. The fuck was I talking about? Oh yeah, the price of nostalgia. So I'm going to share my screen real quick for those of you watching on the YouTube or the Facebook. And I'm like, so how much would it cost me if I had nothing? Now, I still actually have my original console. I actually have 2 functional NES consoles. But if I was getting into this fresh, how much would it cost me? This vendor on eBay, and eBay is really the best place that you're going to find a lot of retro shit like this. Like, don't go to fucking GameStop. Like, I know they tried recently to get into fucking like retro gaming and stuff. Actually, does anybody out there remember Funkoland? Remember when Funkoland was its own store where they would buy and trade specifically like retro games? Well, fucking GameStop bought them out, and they immediately ditched the whole retro game concept. Like, within a year, they're like, nah, this isn't for us. We're just going to try to get you to pre-order the next greatest Xbox 360 game and then sell it back to us for like $20, and we're going to turn around and sell it for 50. But that's a whole other story. So looking at my screen here, this is one of the better vendors that I found on eBay, and they're selling a refurbished NES console with Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3 and Double Dragon for $184, free shipping. That's not bad. And they even mentioned in here that the 72 pin connector is refurbished. So right out the gate with some of the best, most iconic games of the fucking console, you get that, a functional console for just under $190, which to me seems pretty good. If you're starting fresh. Now, I wanted to go through and also look at some of the games and see, okay, I know some games are a little bit pricey nowadays, but we'll see. So wanted to go and start with the game I was just talking about earlier, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. This is one of the more expensive ones because I don't know if you guys remember, well, some of you may not, but the contract, the deal that Mike Tyson had with Nintendo ran out because at some point in the early 90s, Mike Tyson decided to go and rape some woman. And Nintendo's like, fuck, this guy's like on our game. Maybe we're going to change this. And then it just became Punch-Out with Mr. Dream. The only thing they changed was the skin of the last boxer, Mike Tyson. They made it some like big white guy. Which, by the way, they'd probably get so much shit if they did something like that today. But he had the exact same moves. It was the exact same fight, just a different skin on that last boss. And, these copies of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out are up there. So we're seeing some at mid 40s, 48, 53. So there's one for 80. And none of these are actually buy it now. These are all bids, it looks like. So there's one at 25. Oh, okay. There's a buy it now for 25. Says it's excellent condition. All right. So if you find the right one, you can probably get it fairly cheap if 25 is cheap for you. Now, you're going to see a theme throughout, and that's factory sealed graded games. This actually was in the news a few weeks ago, a graded factory sealed copy of Super Mario Brothers just recently sold for like 140 grand, something like that. And if you can see my screen on eBay, a factory sealed Mike Tyson's Punch Out, 43 grand. Fucking crazy. Who'd have thought when you rolled into your fucking local Toys R Us and you just saw racks of fucking factory sealed NES games that, if you picked one of these up and just like put it in a box, took care of it, and then brought it back out 30 years later, somebody would give you fucking 40 grand for it. Oh my God. Oh, that's painful. Anyway, moving on. Final Fantasy, my favorite game of all time. Oh my God, I'm so mad at myself for getting rid of my copy because I currently don't have a physical copy of Final Fantasy for the NES. I ended up selling mine years ago. That's fucking shaving cream in my ear. That's great. So yeah, right now it looks like I could buy one now for about 30. There's one that's currently got a bid of 13. So yeah, I could probably get one for a reasonable amount. Okay, here's one for $21.50. Buy it now, and it comes with the maps. I still have my maps and my manual. I just don't have the fucking game. So again, when you're going on eBay and you're looking at games, scroll down, look at everything. Don't just take the first couple of bids because obviously, if I'd have just bought now this first one for $29.99, I'd have overpaid because there's cheaper ones down lower. Tecmo Super Bowl. Again, this was the first football game on any console that kept track of seasonal stats that let you play multiple seasons. It was fucking awesome. And it's actually pretty cheap. You got a couple of bids right now and under $10, $7, $9. I buy it now for $24. Seems like a pretty good deal if you ask me. Dragon Warrior. Funny thing about Dragon Warrior, there was a point in time where they were giving free copies away with subscriptions to Nintendo Power. If you subscribe to Nintendo Power, this was probably in like 90, because I already had the game. Like I bought the game fucking as soon as I knew of it. And if you subscribe to Nintendo Power, they'd send you a free copy of fucking Dragon Warrior. So there's copies of the game out fucking everywhere. So to see it at $9.90 as a buy it now, not surprised whatsoever. Moving along. Now, though, if you get into the sequels, actually going back to this tab, look at right below this. Dragon Warrior 2, $99. A lot of these sequels start getting very, very expensive if you try to go back and buy them now. And then in this tab, Dragon Warrior 3, $84, $200. So some of these games, even though they were really good and fairly popular, were not printed that much, and the demand is pretty damn high. And again, this is only NES. At some point, I would love to do this for other consoles, get into the Super Nintendo. I know Angelo brought up the GameCube, prices of GameCube games. In fact, there's one that I'm trying to sell right now because it's really fucking expensive, and I bought it when it was like $10. But yeah. So this is Snow Brothers. What is Snow Brothers, you ask? I asked my wife that very same question because another thing that she told me when we were first dating was, oh yeah, we used to love Snow Brothers in my house. I'm like, Snow Brothers, is that the one with the guys and the hammers and they're on the ice? And I'm like, wait, no, that's Ice Climbers. What the fuck is Snow Brothers? She's like, oh my God, it was the greatest game. Me and my brother and sisters played it all the time. I'm like, okay. When Funkoland was starting to become a big thing in the late 90s, she's like, oh, let's go see if we can find a copy of Snow Brothers. Back then, it was like $60 or $70. It was like the most expensive NES cartridge of any of the fucking games they had in this fucking store. I'm like, what the fuck? Why is it so expensive? They're like, they didn't make many copies, man. These things are very hard to find. And now if you look at fucking eBay, it looks like $200 is the cheapest you're going to get a copy of this game. Kristen tells me this story. Apparently, her mother threw out their copy of Snow Brothers. She's so pissed about this. I guess one day, one of the kids, this might have been after she moved in with me back in 98, but one of her siblings left the game out on the floor or something, and apparently she threw it out. And she's still pissed about that, which if you look now, it's like, fuck me. Can't believe a game like that is worth over $200 now. So, you know, if you have a game like this that you have these fond memories of, this is the kind of price you're going to pay for one of these more rare games. And then looking, Contra. I know a lot of people were talking about Contra in the chat. Like I said, my cousin Jeff and I loved Contra growing up. Looks like you can get it for under 30 for some buy it nows. So not the worst, but yeah, it's very popular. It's also on the NES Classic. So if if you want to play that and you don't mind a little bit of emulation, you can go ahead and play the NES Classic. Something else, speaking of which, Dave and I talked about the NES Classic quite a bit in episode 2 of the show. One of the biggest complaints was the length of the controllers, right? Because they decided, hey, we're going to downscale everything on this thing, including for some reason the length of the fucking cord. So if you're playing it on an HD TV, you're like 2 feet in front of the fucking TV looking up because these cords aren't very long. They came out with extenders and wireless controllers eventually, but they were not good. They had terrible response. Dave mentioned he bought an extender and he could tell there was lag from when he pushed the button to when there were actions on the screen. However, if you bought the SNES Classic, that had a much longer cord on the old SNES Classic controllers, and it's the same interface as the NES Classic. And that SNES controller works if you plug it into an NES Classic. So if you want that longer controller without any kind of lag or anything, get the SNES Classic controller, hook it up to that NES Classic, and you're in there. Lunar Girl just brought up in the chat, Friday the 13th. What a crazy fucking game. I played that so much back in the day. And it wasn't that good, but it was a fucking wild game back in the day. Another classic NES game. In fact, we're going to look that up right now on eBay. We're going to do this live. Friday the 13th. Yes. Okay, $15. Not bad. Yeah. Really, really quirky game. Oh, Goonies 2. I should have put that in my honorable mentions. What a fucking crazy game that was. So, and also in the chat, my cousin Jeff brings up the fact that, yeah, a lot of people, they build Raspberry Pis. In fact, I have one too, that you can put the emulators and stuff on, and they actually work really well. But it's not the same. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just me. But playing an emulator versus actually having that original NES controller in your hand and playing it on the fucking TV, they don't compare. I don't know if maybe it's that whole nostalgia in me, right? The whole Gen X nostalgia. But I feel like if I'm ever really going to seriously play one of these games and not just like fuck around on it for a couple of minutes, then I would want to bust out my old console, hook it up to a TV, preferably a non-HD TV. I actually used to keep an old CRT TV back. Is that what they were even called? I don't know. Well, you know what I mean? The old style TVs before HD came around. I kept one of those around strictly to play my NES, SNES, N64, PlayStation 1 games on. But yeah, Duck Hunt. Perfect example. No way to play Duck Hunt on an emulator. And do I still have my Zapper? I'll have to look. I wonder how that works on HD TVs too, with the Zapper and Duck Hunt. So, and that actually is a good segue into the other part of this. There's multiple costs to playing retro games. Yes, cathode ray tube. Thank you. And I mean, one is the monetary cost. And we're going to go ahead and unshare this screen real quick. But there's also there's got to be a term for it where you're so nostalgic about something. You think back on it as like, oh, just such fond memories. And then you go back and actually experience. And it was like, that was not nearly as good as I remember. And I feel like that's probably a price with some of this retro gaming because, you think about it, you go back and you play some of these games. We played these games at very different times in our lives when we were either kids or fucking teenagers. And quite frankly, had nothing fucking better to do or just had a ton of free time to sink into these things. Like we talk about the original Final Fantasy that I keep going back to. I sunk hundreds of hours into this because I had nothing else to do but just make sure my grades didn't fucking fall in school. That was it. That was the only responsibility I had. And my stepdad made me do some yard work on Sundays every weekend, but that was nothing. Yeah, deja vu. Yes, you must have joined late, Jeff, because I was talking about that earlier. I was actually talking about when you and I played Contra over the weekend. that one time. Remember when we got the Contra game and we played it together over the course of a weekend, beat the shit out of it? Good times. Anyway, fuck, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, tons of time to sink into video games. And you go back now and you try to play something. First of all, there's the time issue. We're all adults, we have kids, we have wives, fucking jobs, responsibilities, and you really can't put in the time that you could in those. So even though we're older, wiser, we can probably afford to go back and buy some of this stuff, we just don't have the time to sink in. And then you've also got the factor of modern games have surpassed these games far and away in a lot of ways. Perfect example, Final Fantasy, right? Party-based role-playing combat. You have 4 guys. Sometimes you're playing against multiple enemies. Your first guy, you tell him, all right, attack this guy. Second guy, also attack him. Third guy, also attack him. Fourth guy, also attack him. Well, if your first husband swings and kills him, then your other 3 party members will attempt to swing in that same thing. They won't just move on to the next fucking thing. Whereas, like, by Final Fantasy 2 on the NES or SNES, they had already fixed that problem. But in the first Final Fantasy, there were little quirks like that. If you told all your people to attack one guy and he fucking died on the first or second swing, your other 2 attacks would be fucking wasted for the rest of that round. And yes, I'm sorry, Luna Girl. Some of us have husbands or wives. Got to be gender inclusive here. Sorry, I got to work on that. But, yeah, and, just the mechanics don't age well sometimes. And sometimes you'll play a game and you're like, okay, I guess if I had, like 20 hours to spare, this would be fun to get into, but I don't. So I guess this was all for nothing. And that's the other price to pay with retro gaming, because, I mean, unless you're unemployed or retired, sometimes you just can't dedicate the time that you would want to going back and like trying to relive those moments. And I even have them with more modern games too. I can remember a buddy of mine and we got the first Halo game, and we did fucking co-op Halo, and we beat the shit out of the whole fucking game. First we played through the hard, and then we played through the expert mode, whatever the 2 highest difficulties were. And it took hours, and we did it over the course of like, I don't know, a 12-hour gameplay session. It was great. We fucking didn't sleep that night. I'm like, I couldn't do that now. I wouldn't want to do that now. I would, as soon as like 9 p.m. hits, I'm like, okay, time to start getting ready for bed. So all night gaming sessions, those are done in the Roskam household for the most part. So, you sit there and you go back and you look back on these good times playing these games, and how great they were. And, it's all in the context of that moment. In 2020, well, maybe 2020 is an outlier here because, global pandemics and everything notwithstanding. 2019 or 2021, you look at it in the context of those, and it's not going to be the same. It'll never be the same. It'll never be as enjoyable. So you got to kind of wonder, like, do you still go back and try to recapture some of that magic, or do you just do like what my cousin Jeff was saying, just throw it up on an emulator every once in a while, fuck around with it, and then just call it a day? Me personally, one of these days, I'd love to actually go back and try to put some serious time into these. Maybe when I retire from the military, if I can figure out a way to not have to work again after that, who the hell knows? But one thing that I do want to do, I saw somebody mention this on like a forum or something. There's a challenge that people are doing out there, and I feel like I have to do this. Again, going back to Final Fantasy, favorite game, get over it. One of the classes you can pick in that is the White Mage. It's your healer, right? That's pretty much all they are, is the healer. Like, they have a basic attack, but their basic attack fucking sucks. And you can mix and match your party however you want. You've got the warrior, you've got the monk, you've got monk. You've got the thief, you've got the red mage, black mage, white mage, and you can mix and match your team of 4 on any of those classes. You can double up or triple up or quadruple up on any of those classes if you want. And one of the big challenges out there is beating Final Fantasy with 4 white mages, nothing but 4 healers. So I saw that. I'm like, I kind of want to try that. So I'm thinking about busting out the NES Classic, and because Final Fantasy, the original version of Final Fantasy, is on there, and trying to do a 4 white mage playthrough of Final Fantasy. So I'll keep you guys updated as to how that goes. I don't know. I don't know if it'll go well, but we'll see. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I wanted to do a little bonus episode because I feel like Dave and I didn't have nearly enough time to talk about all the NES stuff I wanted. Even in this, I didn't talk about nearly as much as I could have. But yeah, it's fun going back and talking about this, and I do want to spend some time talking about the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, because there were so many games on that I could spend a lot of time talking about. The Super Nintendo. Holy fuck. I mean, you want to talk about groundbreaking. I mean, the original NES, though, that was the one that brought video games back and brought them back into our living rooms, and for good this time. And then the Super Nintendo just took it up into the whole next level. Um, the N64, I think the N64 was very underrated. Obviously, it had some games that are still very well known today, but there were some. It was not the most popular console at the time, because now we're talking the era of the PlayStation, which the first PlayStation, holy fuck, there were a lot of games on that system, and obviously some of them are good. There are a lot of really obscure games on the first PlayStation that I absolutely loved, and then of course there were some that were beloved across, all spectrums. And one of them, which has been in the news lately because it's getting a remake, is Tony Hawk. I fucking loved the first 2 Tony Hawk games, and the Tony Hawk 1 and 2 HD remake. They've already done one HD remake of the first Tony Hawk, so don't get it twisted. This came out a few years ago. It was okay, but now I think they're giving it a much better treatment this time around. I think it's coming out in like a week or two. And I'm really excited about that, but I'm more interested in the soundtrack. Half of what made Tony Hawk so good were these soundtracks. A lot of them were very recognizable songs, but some of them were very obscure songs that like I had never heard. But as soon as I did hear them in the game, I'm like, oh, I got to own that. I got to go. And again, this was the late 90s. This was when the piracy stuff was starting to get big. This was when fucking Napster was just starting to get big, when people were fucking sharing music files. So, I play Tony Hawk. I'm like, oh my God, this song Gold or Superman by Goldfinger is fucking awesome. I want to have that. So I go to fucking Napster and download that. And then Tony Hawk 2, Goldfinger is, what's it called? I don't remember. The I'm Destroying the World song. I immediately had to have that. Then you had some classics like fucking Bring the Noise. Holy shit. What a great fucking song. So yeah, so much to talk about. Oh, Vagrant Story. Vagrant Story was interesting because correct my memory, Angelo, but I think that was the one where you could like start targeting certain body parts when you were in combat. Because that was a Square Enix game, or I think that was before the two companies merged, actually. So I think that was a Square game, Squaresoft. But yeah, Vagrant Story was, and I think that was pre Final Fantasy VII. That's another thing too. I want to replay Final Fantasy VII. I played through it when it first came out back in 97 or 98. Obviously loved it just like everybody else. And of course, I was already a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series. So I wasn't one of these, Johnny come latelys where they're like, oh, everybody's saying this Final Fantasy VII is really good, so I guess I'll play that. And no, I'd played them all up to that point, all the US versions. And yeah, absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII. And that was the only time I ever played through it. Played through it once, the one time in 97 or 98. And that was it. Never picked it up again. They were churning out games quite a bit at that point too, because then they came out with Final Fantasy Tactics not long after the first Final Fantasy. Okay, you got me. I didn't play Mystic Quest because they sold that as a beginner's RPG. So that's also why I don't like Skyrim, because Skyrim is a fucking beginner's RPG if you compare it to Oblivion and Morrowind. That's a whole other story. So no, I didn't play Mystic Quest, which, oh, by the way, I got to look that up because I bet that's really fucking expensive now on the for cartridge. Hold on. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest SNES. Look at that, auto-populated. Huh. $11. I may have to get that. All right. And we've also got Dave in the chat. So yeah, I really want to go back and replay Final Fantasy. The remake, I don't know. Like they kind of lost me after the PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy games. I don't know. I'm much more of a fan of the traditional turn-based RPGs. I don't like these fucking action-based fucking RPGs. The way they Square makes them now. It's not my thing. I prefer traditional kind of strategize. All right, I want this guy to fight this guy. I want this girl to cast this spell on this person. And do this, and this. That's my style of role-playing games when it comes to consoles. PC, that's a whole different story. So yeah, I want to go back and replay the original Final Fantasy VII because I played it through it the one time, absolutely loved it. So many good memories, and that's one of those things where does it hold the test of time? Is it one of those games that I know you had the sort of the painted backgrounds and then the shitty polygon characters in the foreground, very similar to Resident Evil or a favorite game of mine, Jade Cocoon, for the first PlayStation, if any of you were ever played that. But yeah, I wonder if that sort of style of graphics really stands up nowadays. But yeah, I really want to replay Final Fantasy VII. Kind of want to replay Tony Hawk. I do have Tony Hawk 1, by the way. Like I have an original physical copy because I recently bought it. Well, this is like 3 years ago now. But I went through a big PlayStation 1 retro kick where I bought a lot of old PlayStation 1 games, which I have them all over there. They're in a big stack. And Tony Hawk was one of them because such a great game. So fun. It's not going to teach you how to really skateboard, but Tecmo Super Bowl isn't going to teach you how to play football either. So I've gotten off on a big enough tangent as it is. Real quick, just want to give a big shout out to everybody who's in the All Things Star Wars family. So first of all, if you're listening to this on the All Things Star Wars feed, go and subscribe to From a Gen X Point of View. We have our own separate feed for that show now. Go and listen to ATSW Presents The Escape Pod. Our brothers in Michigan doing the Escape Pod podcast. They apparently they had the audience rolling for this last episode when they did Bill and Ted. So go back and listen to that. We've got Keith Lehman, our good friend, does the YouTube channel Layman's Terms. Like I said, Scott Rasmussen does Used and Abused. Big relaunch on September 11th. Never forget. Our good friend Big Swede, Tactical Swede, Bacon Swede, Beer Swede. He's everywhere. I just need to get a list. You know what I need to do? I need to get like a splash screen to where I can just fucking flip the YouTube feed to just have like the links to all of our friends' fucking content creation channels, and then just be like, go to all these, subscribe to all these, and you will do it. That being said, I think I'm going to go. Had a lot of fun with this. I honestly did not think I could talk this long by myself without Dave to kind of help carry me the whole way, because, again, Dave's the color guy. He's the guy who adds color to my structure. And that's kind of how we roll. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you, everybody who came in the chat. Saw some folks in the chat that haven't seen in a long time. So good to have you in here. And yeah, just remember, everything I told you today was true from a Gen X point of view.